Hello all, and welcome to tonight's review, which I am going to dub the post-yard work review because I did yard work today for the first time in a long while, and I sort of realized how out of shape I am. I had to use a beer to go and power through the 2.5 hours of yard work. So this is not my first beer of the day. I had one at lunchtime, and then I did yard work for a couple of hours. And yeah, now it's 9 o'clock, so it's been 9 hours since I last had a beer. So why not? Why wouldn't I? Anyways, what are we reviewing today? Well, I was at the Kahala Market, and I saw this in a can. Now, usually in Hawaii, it is sold in this sort of stoneware, earthenware bottle, ceramic bottle. I'm not exactly sure, but it's fairly expensive. This was still fairly expensive, but not as much as like the earthenware ceramic bomber, which was almost like $20. This is about $8, and it looks to be about a pint. Yeah, 1 pint, zero point 0.9 fluid ounces. This is 8.5 ABV, and yeah, this is a Belgian strong pale ale, which is a style I've never actually had before, come to think of it. I've had many Belgian pale ales, but never a strong pale ale. So I'm kind of looking forward to reviewing this. And I know that's kind of a huge hole in my beer drinking resume because Duvel? Duvel is a strong Belgian pale ale that seems to be everywhere. I've just never gotten around to reviewing it yet. Sue me. So it says to pour this into a chalice. I don't have a chalice. It's a little bit too much for my tulip, and I don't think a tulip would be best for it. So into the pint glass it goes, yeah? So this is Brewery Huyghe. Huyghe? 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 I have no idea how to pronounce this Flemish. It is Flemish though, because it's in the Flemish part of Belgium, as opposed to the Walloon part of Belgium. So, a clear golden color, decently carbonated, not very strong carbonation, but decently, with a fizzy to frothy white head. Redolent of cloves, coriander, spice, basically those really phenolic smells that one associates with the use of Belgian yeast. Well, onto the palate now, shall we? Hmm. I wasn't expecting such upfront hoppiness there. But yeah, very hop forward, strongly bitter for a Belgian. I have to say this is one of the most bitter Belgian beers I've ever had. Almost like a zesty, rindy bitterness there. Fairly thick mouthfeel. Just a touch of booziness in the long finish. Not overly so, though, but you can definitely feel a sense of its weight there. In the mids and in the front of the finish, so in the mid to finish, in the mids and in the mid to finish, is where a lot of these, those very stereotypical Belgian taste notes sort of come up. But the hoppiness sort of also creates this interaction, so you don't really get as much of banana notes as you would for a lot of beers that use Belgian yeast. It's still fairly bready. So malts are bready to biscuity, but it really only shows up strongly in the mids. The finish is surprisingly clean. Most of the bitterness passes. Again, you're just kind of sort of left with that very subtle boozy note. Effervescent note is very strong of coriander and other sort of indistinct herbaceous notes. They're also slightly there in the finish. Herbaceous, spicy, sort of like an unknown spice herb melange of sorts. For the excuse me, for the weight and for the ABV, it goes down fairly easily. And as it warms up, that sort of spicy note is expanding from the mids and outward. Clove is kind of becoming a little bit more distinct. But again, I find that hopping to really go and lower the perceived sweetness. There's obviously quite a bit of residual sugars, but the high level of hopping here, it's almost to IPA levels of hopping. It would be if there was, a strong element in the long finish of hops, but there really isn't. Ever so slightly, there is some residual bitterness, but I still would say that it stays within the parameters of what I expect for a pale ale. You know, the hops don't really start. The hops really don't start forming their own taste notes, so sort of hop-related taste notes. Instead, the yeast and the malt still play like the center role in that respect. When I think of an IPA, I think of hop related taste notes in the forefront and center. The hops are really necessary though, because I think, just from tasting this, just from the mids there, you can kind of tell that there's an aggressive, the phenolic aspect, left by the yeast is fairly aggressive. And it's kind of balanced by the hopping and by the malting. So, in summation, what can I say about this particular beer? Well, it doesn't really break new ground for me. It's not really like something that's wowed me. It's something new and something interesting for me, especially since this is like the first Belgian strong pale ale that I've had. But at least so far as I can say from this particular beer, it takes a lot of the taste notes that I am accustomed to with a Belgian pale ale and just cranks it up to 11, which changes some aspects of the beer. The sweetness becomes less perceptible, even though, just from the thickness of the mouthfeel, you can tell that those sugars are there. And some of the related taste notes, shift a little bit. Where like the banana is kind of gone, but with the interplay here, and I'm not sure if it's the yeast or the malts and the sugars remaining or the hops, well, I think the hops are involved. I'm not sure if it's like an interplay with those phenolics left by the yeast in the fermentation process or the malts. That sort of creates that interesting herbaceous spicy note. That spice melange, as it were. Um, yeah, so interesting. Nothing mind blowing for me. I would say that definitely it's worth a try. The price point is fairly high, and it's not as sublime to me as a lot of the Abbey ales are, but still, I think it's I think it's worth a try. And as with all things, your mileage may vary. So, Delirium Tremens with the pink elephant. Let's hope I don't start having convulsions and whatnot. That, folks, is your beer review for this evening. Cheers.